Hello, dear friends. My name is Vasyl Pekhno. I'm a Ukrainian journalist, and I invite all of you to watch this latest update on Ukrainian battle map situation as of September the 23rd. So watch this video, like it, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and leave your comments below. Let's start.
And today's review will mainly be dedicated to Crimea. Crimea, because some very interesting strikes took place there, and overall a certain strategic pattern is emerging in Crimea thanks to such excellent work. The excellent unit of the main intelligence directorate called the Ghosts. The Ghosts are the ones who were the first to use watercraft, meaning our naval drones with FPV. That is, when a naval drone serves as a platform, essentially an aircraft carrier for FPVs, and then FPVs take off from them and strike various areas of Crimea, destroying dozens of radar stations, anti-aircraft missile systems, and aircraft, helicopters, boats, and so on, and other similar assets. In general, this year, there is a truly wonderful and highly active Telegram community, my very good friends indeed, which is called Taras Hrayhorovich Reports. So they meticulously calculated and subsequently created a detailed chart, a comprehensive graph, clearly showing that in the year 2025 alone, just one particular unit, the issuer primary, managed to successfully hit a remarkable 78 different targets across the entire territory of the occupied Crimean Peninsula. You can now clearly see this monthly breakdown of these significant statistics, specifically how many and precisely what kind of strikes were effectively carried out during each and every month. And out of these 78 distinct targets that were successfully hit, they effectively destroyed military equipment and valuable assets worth approximately 4.3 billion United States dollars. That is simply phenomenal work by the primary. A lot of radar stations, a really large number of radar stations were actually hit. More than 20 or 30 radar stations were hit. And on top of that, entire missile launch complexes, about 8 surface-to-air missile systems, were also destroyed, along with a total of 7 Mi-8 helicopters and 2 B-12 amphibious aircraft. Now, specifically about these amphibious aircraft, the first time in history they have been hit, as reported by the main intelligence directorate yesterday. Let's begin our review. This is the video. These are exclusive shots directly from the main intelligence directorate. They're amazing. They're brilliant. We can see that the drone strikes a Mi-8 and then it hits the B-12 Chaika anti-submarine amphibious aircraft. 2 such amphibious aircraft are assembled at the Beriev plant in Russia. This isn't new equipment. It seems these amphibious aircraft date back to the 1960s and look like this. They are capable of landing on water, and their main purpose is detection and counteraction against submarines. Well, it might seem what's so phenomenal about it that the experts were so impressed by some ragged, tattered relic from the middle of the last century, which moreover was supposed to operate against submarines that in principle Ukraine doesn't even have. Since independence, there has been only one submarine, if I'm not mistaken, and even that one was effectively annexed by the Russians in Crimea. So really, what submarines are we even talking about? What other submarines could there possibly be? The thing is, friends, let me remind you that last week we had an event, the presentation of our underwater drone, Toloka. Toloka, in its most advanced, let's say, modification, is 12 meters long. It's no worse for you than a submarine. This is what the Toloka drone looks like. In fact, overall, as Toloka is being presented, there should be at least 3 of them in different warhead weights, to be honest. This one is for 1,000 kilograms, it seems, for 1 ton. There should also be a Toloka for 400 kilograms and for 200, each with different ranges. Accordingly, my theory is that when the Russians saw our underwater drones like these, which are already, so to speak, ready for deployment, they started testing their own, albeit outdated, yet technologically advanced and expensive aircraft. In reality, there aren't that many of them, aircraft that are supposed to detect precisely objects beneath the sea surface, and 2 such aircraft were destroyed by our military in Crimea the other day, along with a Mi-8 helicopter. A day before that, the main intelligence directorate also reported the destruction of 3 more Mi-8 helicopters and a radar station. Nebo-U, there in Crimea, the same unit of the main intelligence directorate, the Ghosts. Well, this is just some fantastic work, what they are doing. Just to sum it up, imagine, in just 2 days, they destroyed 4 helicopters, 2 amphibious aircraft, doing this for the first time in history, and 1 Nebo-U radar station, which is also a very valuable element of the Russian air defense system. And in this, you can really see the overall strategy of our forces regarding the Crimean Peninsula, about which I will now share my thoughts further. But first, let's take a look at the strike on the Mi-8 as well. There may be skeptics who will say, well, what's so special about those strikes? Here you go. The Mi-8 was just obliterated. It simply ceased to exist. And the witnesses of these events there in Crimea, the Russians, even recorded objective control footage. They filmed on their phones what the destroyed helicopters look like. Let's take a look at the video.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
It's clearly lying there, I believe. That's unmistakably the main fuselage of the aircraft. And over there, we can distinctly see another section of the fuselage. These are precisely the kinds of critical targets that are currently being effectively hit, indicating a significant operational impact. So with that in mind, I will now get back to thoroughly discussing and elaborating upon the strategic considerations and the overall plan for the liberation of Crimea. Now, regarding this image from the Taras Hryhorovych community, here's an update. By the way, I encourage you friends to subscribe to my Telegram channel as well. Here you can see how to find it. On Telegram, it's Pekhno News. You can type that into the Telegram search bar, or you can find a direct link to my Telegram community in the description of this video, so feel free to join. Meanwhile, Taras Hryhorovych is showing how, since March of this year, exactly since March, this work on targets in Crimea began. Let me switch to full screen so you can see. Since March, this operation targeting sites in Crimea has been underway. And from March until today, it has been somewhat documented. But here we can see that in the last 2 months, there have been spikes in activity, the 8th and 9th months, that is August and September. And mainly this is a systematic targeting of Russian air defense facilities, especially radar stations. They've blinded the occupiers. This was a systematic operation across the entire peninsula, mostly in its western part, but essentially throughout all of Crimea. These operations were carried out. Accordingly, the systematic destruction of radar stations and other surveillance stations, including, by the way, those used for space reconnaissance and air defense radars, amounts to dozens of installations. Yesterday, and I repeat, the day before yesterday, the Nebo-U was destroyed. All of this deprived the occupiers of the ability to detect our drones, which began to fly in there even more intensively. And overall, right now, the strategy regarding Crimea, as I see it, is that without sufficient air cover, without securing the skies over Crimea, the Russians will start to suffer more and more strikes on their aviation, especially army aviation, on helicopters, on those same Mi-8s. And why is that? The Mi-8s are priority targets for us because they are used against our naval drones. That is, we have repeatedly seen our naval drone going out, going on the hunt. The most effective way to counter it, to intercept it, is with a helicopter that takes off and engages it. Yes, these helicopters try to chase away our special service operators who use naval drones by installing missiles, like the AM-9 Sidewinder, R-73. They mounted anti-aircraft missiles on the drones, and there were even successes. We had successes in shooting down helicopters using naval drones from the platform of a naval drone, as well as against helicopters and airplanes. Su-30s shot down planes. But now, basically, if we want to continue pursuing the strategy of dominance in the Black Sea so that our drones can operate relatively unimpeded, we need to deprive the Russians of this army aviation, these multi-purpose helicopters like the Mi-8. And now systematic work has begun against them. So this is a new stage in the overall strategy for Crimea. First, we took one step, and now we're taking step B. The next step, obviously, should be to clear the entire Crimean coastline of control, to create a kind of buffer zone from the sea on our side. And then, well, I won't speculate here about what comes next. The main thing is to knock out the enemy's equipment, to knock it out. We're not dreaming right now about any amphibious operations or Ukrainian assault troops landing on the peninsula. At the moment, that's just a legend, not relevant, because overall, the trend at the front is shifting more and more toward high-tech drone warfare. Yesterday, I had quite a few, at least 2, conversations with different fighters from UAV units. And they honestly say that now the gray zone at the front is expanding significantly. It's not even a gray zone anymore, but rather a red zone where nothing and no one can survive. It is expanding even when we observe the situation currently unfolding in Dobropilia, it would seem, right? It would seem so. The Russians here should have long been surrounded, sitting in encirclement in Kucherov Yar and here, and generally they should be in such an encirclement here. Yes. Their logistics have been cut off. Yes, in fact, they are surrounded here. Yes. Syrsky says that even as of yesterday, a few more square kilometers were liberated. And overall, since the beginning of the Dobropilia operation, our troops have advanced 164 square kilometers here. But in fact, even in Kuchariavi Yar, even in this location, you can stay put if drones are delivering things to you. And our soldiers are really talking about this. And there are actually many situations like the ones we see here now. In Dobropilia, where a kind of eye is forming, where positions are interwoven, there are such situations all along the front. There are tons of them all along the front. There are many such locations where our troops are, in fact, surrounded. The Russians are cut off from logistics, but drones are changing supply into earned complexes, carrying out logistics. So all of this is changing very, very rapidly right now. And essentially what the line of contact runs where the forward positions of drone pilots from both sides are located. That's the reality, so to speak. We are improving our drones striking in Crimea. The Russians are improving their drones as well. For example, here's a photo of the modified Molnya. This is a strike drone that causes major problems on the front, flying about 30 to 40 kilometers. It's a drone like the Kirilo type. Yesterday, Serhiy Flash, a well-known expert in radio electronic intelligence, warfare, and technology in general, he stated that the Russians have modified their kamikaze drone into a carrier drone, which is capable of transporting other FPV-type UAVs. So, roughly speaking, the Molnya flies about 30 kilometers, distributes a Wi-Fi signal. This is just to put it simply, providing Wi-Fi to the FPV drones, which then fly another 10 kilometers or so and strike our rear positions. We are also capable of flying 40 to 50 kilometers deep into their rear areas. Well, in fact, this is where, in particular, the story with the Molnya mother drone helps explain, among other things, the reports about the recent strikes that have already started happening in Pechenihi. This is Pechenihi, the Pechenihi reservoir. It's about 40 kilometers from both Vovchansk and Kupiansk, but now the Russians are starting to target exactly these locations. And this is a big question. How are we going to protect ourselves from drones? Because it's not just frontline logistics we need to think about, but also border towns, Chernihiv, right? Even considering that it borders Belarus, but Chernihiv is also exposed from the territory of the Russian Federation, as is Sumy. How can we protect them? And, you know, to be honest, Yegor Firsov stirred up a bit of panic over the weekend about Kyiv, but Kyiv isn't that far from the borders either. So in general, I'm not saying that people could suddenly start arriving there en masse. God forbid that can't happen anytime soon. But Kharkiv, Dnipro, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, and even further south, the situation in Kherson is absolutely terrible. The Russians are trying to depopulate that area and are really carrying out a lot of terrorist strikes there in the form of these war crime attacks. But the thing is, they don't shy away from any of this. There's nothing stopping them from doing it all. And we need to think about how we're going to defend our cities. We really need to think about this because FPV, they are increasing, extending their range. Recently, some unidentified aerial vehicle dropped something in the town of Nizhyn. Let's take a look. I'll highlight it on the map right now, and we'll count exactly how many kilometers Nizhyn in Cherkasy region is from the border with Russia. Well, probably the closest is the area somewhere here towards Klimov. So that's 118 kilometers. And here it's 169 kilometers, and already some trouble reached here. Something scattered unknown explosive substances just like that on the ground. Before this, the Russians hadn't used anything like that. What kind of explosive substances were these? The video that was literally shared over the weekend. Well, honestly, it's not really clear. Let's finally watch this video because I'm just talking about it, but you can actually see it directly. So what exactly is this about? So this is actually the video about the highly unusual and incredibly complex logistical challenges at the front lines, detailing the intricate and often unpredictable overall situation we are currently observing there. This is precisely why not everything is as straightforward or simple as it might appear, both in the critical area of Dobropilia and in the strategically important region south of Pokrovsk. The distinguished 7th Air Assault Brigade, which is valiantly defending this particular sector, has openly acknowledged that there are indeed certain significant and evolving changes in the operational environment and tactical dispositions, requiring constant adaptation and strategic adjustments to maintain their defensive posture and effectively counter the dynamic threats they face. The strategies and tactics of the occupiers advancing from the south. Earlier, I reported on certain advances, and now the 7th Air Assault Brigade says that the enemy is now infiltrating with extremely small forces in tiny groups, sometimes even one person at a time. They are making these incursions, and the enemy is massively using drones, up to 600 daily, just in the southern outskirts of Pokrovsk. But overall, the situation is relatively being held, although recently the situation has somewhat worsened for us in the Kostiantynivka direction. Despite the fact that in recent days there were videos from the Azov Brigade showing enemy tanks being hit, unfortunately lately the enemy has already been recorded in autumn footage in the area of even Pleshchivka. There are 2 villages here located next to each other, Pleshchivka and Nelipivka. Separate enemy groups have already been spotted there, which are still being pushed out by our troops, but overall, the enemy does show certain tendencies to advance in the Kostiantynivka direction. Meanwhile, it has been completely lost. Yesterday, I spoke with a good friend of mine from Sumy region who works here in the Unmanned Systems Unit. He says that the occupiers have completely lost the ability to advance any further in the Sumy region. In fact, even the entire steppe that leads to Yunakivka and Yablonivka from the Russian state border is essentially an uncontrolled zone. It's simply a plain, nothing more. The Russians can't advance across it, and obviously we won't be recapturing it either. But in reality, if you thoroughly sweep the area with drones, you can eliminate all the enemy forces present here and turn these zones from red to gray, because the Russians essentially can't maintain total control here. Our drones are actually capable of destroying them in this area. That is after the enemy withdrew its forward units from the Sumy region to Donbass, and this did happen, and these announcements were made publicly. So after this redeployment, the Russians have exactly 0 chance of holding out in the Sumy region. And now the remaining Marines, particularly the 810th Marine Brigade and the 30th Motor Rifle Regiment, although the regiment is not Marines but a motor rifle regiment, the remnants of these units are simply being finished off by our servicemen in the Sumy region. The situation here is honestly really dire and unpleasant for the Russians. In other words, there are positives for us in some places, and there are negatives. This is the typical situation lately. I'm deliberately staying silent about Kupiansk today because we're continuing to maintain a certain information pause regarding Kupiansk. The goal, as with Lyman, is probably to give some time to try to stabilize these situations, which have become quite critical there recently. So that's the situation at the front, friends. Thank you for your attention. Take care of yourselves. All the best.